The rain fell like needles piercing the night, each drop tapping against the stone eaves of the Beverly Hills mansion like a relentless drumbeat. Alexander Harrington stood beside the sliding glass door, a hot cup of coffee in hand, the warmth from the cup spreading, but not enough to chase away the chill that enveloped him. His mansion, a structure of granite and glass, stood towering like a fortress, beautiful, impregnable, but hollow. The cold white walls, the glistening marble floors, all seemed to remind him of the loneliness he had long been accustomed to. He was Alexander Harrington, the man who built a tech empire from hastily written lines of code in a shabby one-room apartment. But now at 42, he lived in a vast space where the echo of his own footsteps startled him. Tonight the storm made everything feel heavier. The wind howled through the palm trees in the yard, and the garden lights flickered dimly through the thick curtain of rain. Alexander took a sip of his coffee, the bitterness sliding down his throat, when a strange sound pierced through the rain's roar, a soft, feeble voice, almost drowned out by the thunder. He tilted his head, set the cup down on the stone table, and opened the glass door. The rain hit his face sharp and cold, but he didn't mind. The voice came again, this time clearer, coming from the corner of the yard near Buddy's doghouse. "Sir, can I sleep in your doghouse?" Alexander froze. A small figure appeared in the dim light of the garden. A little girl no more than 6 or 7 years old stood shivering in the rain. She was a girl of color, her hair matted to her forehead, an old tattered hoodie clinging to her thin body like a second skin. Her bare muddy feet and her eyes, those eyes were both fearful and determined, as if she had long been accustomed to rejection, but still needed to try. "I promise I won't bother you," the girl continued, her voice trembling, but trying to remain calm. "I swear I won't steal anything. Just tonight, please." Alexander blinked, trying to process the scene before him. This was Beverly Hills, where iron fences and security cameras separated his world from the outside. No one, absolutely no one, could cross that fence without being detected. So, where did this girl come from? He stepped out onto the porch, his white shirt soaked by the rain, his voice cold, almost defensive. "Who sent you here?" The girl stared blankly, taking a small step back, her shoulders trembling. "Sent me?" Her voice cracked as if the word sent was a foreign concept. "No. No one." "This isn't a joke," Alexander said, scanning the yard, looking for signs of cameras or any adults standing behind her. In his world, kindness often came with a trap. He had faced lawsuits, smear campaigns, and even conspiracies to bring him down. A little girl standing in the rain, asking to sleep in a doghouse. It could be a PR stunt, or worse, blackmail. But then Buddy, his golden retriever, emerged from the doghouse soaking wet, but wagging his tail gently, not aggressive. Buddy approached the girl, sniffed her hand, and she showed no fear. Instead, she knelt down, wrapped her arms around Buddy's neck, and a dry, hacking cough erupted from her small chest. The cough was harsh, ripping through the air, lasting so long that Alexander instinctively shivered. The girl held herself, trying to contain it, but the cough didn't stop. "I can sleep out here," she whispered, her voice faint. "I'm just so cold, sir. I swear I'm not bad." Alexander stood there, the rain running down his face. He looked at the girl, not just looked but truly saw her, and noticed that the water on her cheeks wasn't just rain. Tears silently cut through the mud on her small face, her lips purple from the cold, her skinny arms covered in goosebumps. She tried to appear strong, but her body betrayed her will, trembling like a leaf in the wind. There was something in her eyes, a desperate resilience that struck him like a dagger to the chest. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer, taking a slow step toward her. "Emily," the girl whispered, her voice choking. "Emily Brooks. I have nowhere to go. They've closed the doors. They look at me like I'm garbage. She coughed again, this time weaker, as though her strength was draining. I don't want to die, she suddenly said, almost crying. Not tonight. Not like this. Those words hit Alexander like a hammer, shattering something deep within him. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, falling onto the stone porch with a small clink. He didn't notice. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, faced smear articles, kept a cold face under pressure. But a child kneeling in his yard, soaking wet and begging for a small corner by his dog, this melted something deep inside him. Something he thought he had buried long ago. All right, he said, his voice hoarse. All right, come here. Seeing Emily not move as if she couldn't believe it, he added, You won't get into trouble. I promise. He knelt down, arms outstretched. Emily hesitated, crawling forward each step, seemingly draining all her strength. When his hand touched her shoulder, he was startled not by fear, but by how cold she was. My God, he muttered. You have a fever. I won't bark, Emily whispered, almost delirious. I won't bark. Alexander gently lifted her, as though lifting a stack of blankets. Buddy followed closely, tail wagging anxiously. Inside the mansion, the warm yellow light felt like a different world. The sound of Alexander's footsteps echoed on the marble floors, decisive but tense. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, his longtime housekeeper, appeared from the hallway, stunned. Sir, she said, her eyes wide as she looked at the girl in his arms. The girl is sick. He snapped, his voice sharp but not angry. Bring blankets. Call Dr. Hayes. Tell him to come immediately. But who is she? Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice trembling. She's staying here tonight, Alexander replied. That's all you need to know. They laid Emily on the guest room sofa. Mrs. Thompson returned with a wool blanket, hot soup, and clean clothes. Emily weakly stirred, mumbling about her mother, then coughed again, tears streaming down her face. Alexander sat beside her, never taking his eyes off her. Drink this, he said, bringing a spoonful of soup to her lips. You'll feel better. Between sips of soup, Emily looked up. You're the owner of the dog, right? Yes, Alexander replied gently. Thank you for not making me sleep out there, she said, her eyes half closed. I'm not scared. The dog is better than most people. The words struck like a knife. Alexander didn't respond, only whispered, You're safe now, Emily. She nodded, her eyelids heavy, then drifted off to sleep under the wool blanket. The rain still tapped against the window, softer now, as if the storm itself were apologizing. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat in the armchair opposite the sofa, his elbow resting on his knee, his hands clasped tightly under his chin. He watched Emily, her breathing shallow but steady, and each cough made him tense a little more. In his mind, her words echoed, I don't want to die. Not like this. A child had said that. A child. And for the first time in many years, in his stone fortress and his silence, a crack appeared, small, but enough for the light to shine through. The morning light filtered through the thick silk curtains in the living room, casting a golden hue on the cold marble floor. Alexander Harrington sat in the armchair, his eyes red from a sleepless night. Yet his posture remained straight, as if exhaustion dared not let him collapse. On the opposite sofa, Emily Brooks lay curled up under the woolen blanket, her breathing lighter than the night before, though still interrupted by the occasional cough. She seemed smaller in the daylight, as though the darkness of the storm had temporarily magnified her presence. Alexander watched her, his mind swirling with unspoken questions. Who is this girl? Where did she come from? And why, out of all the houses in Beverly Hills, did she choose Buddy's doghouse to seek shelter? A small sound broke his train of thought. Emily stirred, opened her eyes, and then shot up as quickly as a startled animal. Her eyes scanned the room, high ceilings, an abstract painting hanging on the wall, the glimmering light from the crystal chandelier, and for a moment she seemed ready to run. "This isn't a dream," she whispered, her voice almost as if to reassure herself. She looked at Alexander, her eyes wide, filled with doubt. You're not going to kick me out, are you?" Alexander leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "No, Emily. You're safe here." He paused, noticing that she still clutched the corner of the blanket, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. "Are you hungry? We can have breakfast." Emily blinked as if the concept of breakfast was a foreign luxury. She nodded slowly, but her gaze remained cautious, like someone who had become accustomed to promises being broken. Alexander stood up and gestured for her to follow him into the kitchen. Her footsteps were light, almost tentative, as if afraid to disturb the house's stillness. The kitchen was vast, with granite countertops and the scent of freshly brewed coffee, a world apart from the cold rain of the previous night. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, the housekeeper, had already prepared a hearty breakfast. French toast dusted with powdered sugar, fresh strawberries, and real maple syrup. Emily sat at the bar stool, her eyes wide as she stared at the plate of food as if it were an impossible painting. "Go ahead, eat as much as you want," Alexander said, noticing that she was taking tiny bites as if rationing. "No one's going to take it away." Emily looked up, her tiny hands gripping the fork tightly. "Are you sure once I ate too much and they said I was greedy?" Her voice trembled, but not from fear, more like an old memory resurfacing. A vague anger rose within Alexander, not toward Emily, but toward the people who made this little girl think that a meal was something to be paid for. He sat down across from her, trying to keep his voice calm. "Here you can eat as much as you want. No one will judge you." She nodded but continued eating slowly, each bite seeming carefully measured. When she took another strawberry, her eyes lit up as though she were discovering treasure. "It's sweeter than I thought," she said, almost whispering. "Did you make this?" Alexander smiled faintly. "No, but I'll accept the compliment." He paused, then asked, "Emily, why did you come here? I mean, why my house?" She stopped chewing, looking down at the plate. "I don't know. I walked a long way, and then I saw Buddy's doghouse. It looked warmer than the other places." She hesitated, then added, "People closed their doors when they saw me. They looked at me like I was trouble." Her words were like a dagger twisting in Alexander's chest. He remembered his own childhood, that cold night by the gas station when his father left with a promise of 5 more minutes. 5 minutes turned into an entire night, then a lifetime. He had learned to lock away his emotions, after that building an empire so no one could hurt him again. But looking at Emily with her skinny arms and eyes filled with both hope and fear, he felt that armor begin to crack. "You're not trouble," he said, his voice rough. "You're just a child, and someone should help you." Emily looked at him, as though weighing whether to believe him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp like a challenge. "You don't know me." Alexander hesitated. He didn't have a clear answer, not because he lacked reasons, but because the real reason was too vague, too profound. "Because someone should," he replied, repeating the words he had said the night before. But this time he knew it wasn't enough. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because he was beginning to feel something deeper, a connection he never thought he needed. The morning passed, and Alexander canceled all meetings for the day, something unprecedented in the history of his company. He called Dr. Benjamin Hayes, requesting a checkup for Emily. The doctor arrived carrying his medical bag and a thoughtful expression. "She's malnourished," Hayes said, after examining her, his voice low but serious. There are a few old bruises on her ribs, nothing recent, but clearly signs of a long period without care. If she had stayed outside one more night, it could have been dangerous. Alexander knotted his hands, gripping the armrest. What did she say about her past? Not much, Hayes replied. She just said her mother died and she's been wandering ever since. Doesn't mention anyone else. When the doctor left, Alexander returned to the living room, where Emily was sitting with Buddy coloring a picture with crayons that Mrs. Thompson had found in the storage. The picture was of a doghouse, but not Buddy's doghouse. It had blue curtains, a welcome mat, and a bright sun overhead. Is this where you want to be? He asked, sitting next to her. Emily shrugged. It's just imaginary. Doesn't have to be real. But her eyes told a different story, a fierce longing, not just for a place to stay, but for a place to belong. Alexander looked at the picture, feeling something stir inside him. It wasn't pity, but something closer to respect. This little girl, though small and fragile, had survived what he had gone through, and she still dared to dream. Maybe it's not just imaginary, he said, his voice soft. Maybe we can make something real. Emily looked up, her eyes sparkling with a glimmer of hope, but quickly masked it with a shrug. Maybe, she said, then turned back to her drawing as if afraid hope would hurt her. That night, as Emily slept on the sofa again, Alexander sat in his office, the computer screen open to websites about child welfare systems, shelters, and the cold statistics on homelessness. Each line of text felt like an accusation, not just toward the world, but toward him, the man who had lived in this fortress, closing the door on the pains of the outside world. He looked out the window where the rain had stopped, and the moonlight cast its glow on Buddy's doghouse. A quiet decision formed within him. Emily would not return to that storm. Not tonight. Perhaps never again. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, casting a brilliant golden glow on the spiral staircase. Alexander Harrington stood at the foot of the stairs, his hands clasped tightly together, watching Emily Brooks take slow, tentative steps down her small feet, uncertain as they explored a world that felt foreign to her. She was wearing a white t-shirt and new jeans that Mrs. Eleanor Thompson had prepared too big for her skinny frame, but clean and warm. Emily gripped the banister, her eyes scanning the grand foyer from the abstract oil painting on the wall to the walnut bookshelves packed with classic novels. This place is bigger than the public library, she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and skepticism. Alexander smiled faintly, though inside a storm of emotions brewed. Last night, after reading dozens of articles on homelessness and children in need, he realized he was stepping into an uncharted territory. He had built a tech empire, faced the sharpest competitors, but a 6-year-old girl with a look that was both resilient and vulnerable made him feel helpless. "Do you want to take a tour around the house?" he asked, his voice gentle, as if inviting a little bird to leave the nest. Emily shrugged, but her eyes brightened just a little. "I guess. But aren't you busy? I mean, you've got a ton of things to do, right? Rich people are always busy." That remark made Alexander pause. He remembered the days when work consumed him, meetings that stretched until midnight, transcontinental flights, and loneliness that clung to him like a shadow. "I'm free today," he said, and for the first time in years, he truly wanted that to be true. "Come on, I'll be your tour guide." They started in the library, where the smell of old paper and polished wood filled the air. Emily ran her fingers over the books, her touch gliding over the leather covers as though they were antiques. "Have you read all of these?" she asked, her voice full of suspicion. "Not all of them," Alexander admitted, sitting down next to her. "But I keep them because they remind me that there's still so much to learn." He paused, realizing he was speaking the truth. "Do you like books?" Emily shrugged, but her eyes lingered on a hardcover book, Charlotte's Web. My mom used to read books to me, she said, her voice dropping. Not a lot, but when she was healthy, she read about a spider and a pig. I liked the spider. Alexander picked up the book and opened to the first page. I can read it to you if you want. He wasn't sure why he made the offer. He hadn't read to anyone, not even to himself in years. But Emily's gaze, both eager and wary, made him want to try. She nodded and sat down on the rug, pulling her knees close. Alexander began reading, his voice awkward at first, but gradually warming, falling into rhythm with the story. When he reached the part where Charlotte weaves the words, "some pig in her web," Emily giggled softly, the sound small but bright like a wind chime. "That spider is really smart," she said. "She makes everyone notice the pig, like, makes them see it." Alexander nodded, but her words resonated deeper within him. Makes them see it. He looked at Emily, realizing she wasn't just talking about the story. She was talking about herself, a child, overlooked by the world, cast aside, but still finding a way to be seen. He closed the book, feeling a wave of emotion rise within him. "Do you want to stay here a little longer?" he asked, his voice thickening. "I mean here with me." Emily looked at him, her gaze sharp as if she were trying to read him. "You're not doing this out of pity," she said, her voice harder now. "I don't need anyone's pity." "It's not pity," Alexander answered quickly, almost too quickly. "I want you to stay because I think you deserve a safe place." He paused, searching for words. "And because I want to know more about you." She was silent for a long moment before nodding. "Okay. But I'll help with chores. I'm not staying for free." Alexander laughed, this time genuinely. "Deal." That afternoon, Emily explored the house further, from the living room with its stone fireplace to the backyard garden where Buddy ran around. She stopped in front of a large photo hanging in the hallway, Alexander shaking hands with the president, both smiling for the camera. "Do you know the president?" Emily asked, her voice half in wonder, half in doubt. "Just a photo op," Alexander said, shrugging. "It's part of the job." Emily tilted her head. "Does your job help kids like me?" That question landed like a punch. Alexander opened his mouth, but there was no ready answer. His company, a tech giant, created applications and systems worth billions. But he had never thought about how they might help children like Emily. "Not yet," he admitted, his voice lowering. "But maybe I should start." Emily nodded, as if satisfied with his honesty. "You should. There are a lot of kids out there. They need to be seen too." That night, Alexander prepared a private bedroom for Emily, with a double bed covered in a blue blanket and a window overlooking the garden. "The door will always be open," he said as he led her in. "You're not locked in here." Emily looked at the room, her hand brushing over the soft sheets. "You don't need to do this," she whispered. "A corner of the sofa would have been enough." "No, it's not enough," Alexander said firmly. "You deserve better." As Emily drifted off to sleep, Alexander sat in his office, the laptop screen glowing with emails from the PR team. A photo taken from the security camera had leaked one of him carrying Emily in the rain with the headline, "The Billionaire's Secret, the Homeless Girl." He clenched his hands, anger surging. He knew the world outside would judge, would question, would turn his kindness into a sensational story. But when he looked out the window and saw the light casting over Buddy's doghouse, he remembered Emily's drawing the doghouse with curtains and a bright sun. He called Rebecca Lawson, his personal lawyer. "I need you first thing tomorrow," he said, his voice low but resolute. "There's a little girl here, and I want to make sure she's safe. Do whatever it takes." There was a pause on the other end. Then Rebecca replied, "Understood, sir. I'll be there." Alexander hung up the phone, looking out into the darkness. Inside him, a small flame began to burn, not out of anger, but a new resolve. Emily was not just a child who appeared in his yard. She was a reminder, a challenge, and perhaps an opportunity for him to become a better version of himself. He didn't know what. The bright noon sunlight streamed through the dining room windows, making Emily Brooks' silver bracelet sparkle on her wrist. The bracelet, a surprise gift from Alexander Harrington, glinted with a small key charm, like an invisible promise that she belonged here. Emily twirled the bracelet around her wrist, her eyes shining as the silver caught the light, but her smile quickly faded when the doorbell rang sharp and persistent. Alexander, sitting across from a cup of coffee, furrowed his brow. The ring wasn't from a visitor. It carried an ominous tone, as though the world outside had found a way to intrude upon the peaceful fortress he had built. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson appeared in the doorway, her lips pressed tight. "Sir, there are reporters at the gate," she said, her voice low but tense. "They want to speak with you, and they know about the girl." Alexander set his coffee cup down, his movements slow but controlled. He had seen the headline yesterday, "The Billionaire's Secret, the Homeless Girl." And although his PR team was working to extinguish the scandal, he knew the press wouldn't back off easily. "Tell them to leave," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "I have nothing to say." Emily looked at him, her small hands gripping the bracelet. "What did they say about me?" she asked, her voice small but sharp, as though she was used to being the subject of whispered words. Alexander hesitated. He didn't want the girl to see those articles, the ones that called her a homeless child, or worse, suggested that he was exploiting her to improve his image. "Just some foolish words," he replied, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Don't worry about it. You're safe here." But Emily wasn't easily soothed. She stood up and walked over to the window, peering out at the crowd of people with cameras and microphones gathering at the gate. "They think I'm trouble," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My mom used to say the world doesn't like people like me. They look at me and only see mistakes." Her words struck Alexander like a knife to the chest. He walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, as if afraid to startle her. "They're wrong, Emily. You're not trouble, and I won't let them hurt you." He paused, feeling a rare surge of anger, not at Emily, but at the world that had made a 6-year-old child feel like a burden. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with both hope and doubt. "Do you promise?" "I promise," Alexander said, his voice as firm as when he signed billion-dollar contracts. But this time the promise was heavier, because it wasn't just a transaction, it was a commitment to a person. In the afternoon, Alexander called Rebecca Lawson, his personal lawyer, to the mansion. Rebecca, with her blonde hair tied up and sharp eyes, entered the office with a stack of papers. "I've contacted Child Protection Services," she said, her voice professional but betraying some concern. "There's a problem. A man named Daniel Pierce claims to be Emily's uncle. He's requesting custody." Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. "Uncle." He glanced out the window where Emily was sitting in the garden, with Buddy adding more details to her drawing of the doghouse. "She never mentioned him." Rebecca flipped a page in the file. "He's the brother of Emily's mother, Sophia Reynolds. It seems he learned about the girl through the media. He claims he has blood rights, and Child Services are looking into it." Alexander clenched his fists. "Find out everything about him. I want to know why he's showing up now." When Rebecca left, Alexander walked out to the garden. Emily was sitting on the grass, Buddy lying beside her, his head resting on her lap. "Do you know Daniel Pierce?" he asked, sitting down next to her. Emily froze her hand, halting mid-drawing. She looked down, her voice dropping. "He's my uncle. He wasn't good to my mom." She hesitated, then whispered, "He used to lock the fridge so my mom and I couldn't get food. Mom said he hated us because she married a white man." A wave of anger surged within Alexander, but he restrained himself, keeping his voice calm. "Did he ever do anything to you?" Emily shook her head, but her eyes told a different story. "I don't want to see him," she said, her voice shaking. "He'll make me disappear." Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder. "I won't let that happen. You're here with me, okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were still filled with worry. To reassure her, Alexander led her into the kitchen where Mrs. Thompson was preparing cookie dough. "Would you like to try?" he asked, pointing to the bowl of dough. Emily hesitated, then nodded, a small smile appearing as she dipped her hands into the dough, clumsily shaping cookies. In that moment, with dough on her cheek and a soft laugh escaping her, she looked like any other child, not the billionaire's secret, but simply Emily. But that moment didn't last. That night, when Emily was asleep, Alexander sat in his office reading the preliminary report from Rebecca. Daniel Pierce had a long history, debts, family disputes, and a past investigation for domestic violence, though he had never been convicted. Alexander gripped the phone tightly, feeling a new resolve form inside him. He had fought to protect his company, but this time the battle was much more personal. He wouldn't let Emily fall into the hands of someone like Pierce. He remembered Emily's words about her mother, Sophia Reynolds. "Mom used to say if I ever had a home, I'd make it really warm," the girl had said while making cookies, her voice full of longing. Alexander looked out the window where the darkness covered the garden. He thought of his own past that night at the gas station, waiting hopelessly for his father. He had promised himself he would never be abandoned again. But now, looking at Emily, he realized something. He didn't just want to protect her from the world, he wanted to give her a home, a truly warm place like she had dreamed. His phone vibrated. A message from Rebecca. "Pierce has filed a formal petition. The preliminary hearing will be in 2 weeks." Alexander set the phone down, his eyes hardening. The battle had just begun, and he wasn't going to let Emily lose. Courtroom number 3 at the Los Angeles Family Court was steeped in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Judge Harlan Brooks' pen on the wooden desk. Light from the tall windows poured onto the floor, highlighting the floating dust particles in the air, as if even time was hesitating before this trial. Alexander Harrington sat in the front row, his black suit impeccably tailored, but his hands gripped tightly under the table, his thumb gliding over his knuckles as a way to suppress his anxiety. Beside him, Emily Brooks, small in the blue dress Mrs. Eleanor Thompson had chosen, sat with her back straight, her wide eyes scanning the room. She clutched her silver bracelet with the key charm tightly, as if it were a talisman of protection. Alexander glanced at her, attempting a reassuring smile, but inside a storm was churning. Rebecca Lawson, his lawyer, stood by the plaintiff's table, her sharp voice calm, yet firm as she spoke. "Your Honor, we are requesting temporary custody for Mr. Alexander Harrington. Emily Brooks has been under his care for the past 2 weeks in a safe, stable environment where all of her needs have been met. We have a report from Dr. Benjamin Hayes confirming that the child's health has improved significantly." On the opposite side, Daniel Pierce sat with his lawyer, a short man with round glasses and a shifty look. Pierce, in a wrinkled gray suit, stared at Emily, his cold gaze making her shrink into herself. Alexander noticed this, and a simmering anger began to rise within him. He had read Rebecca's report on Pierce, an individual with a history of debt, family disputes, and unproven allegations of domestic violence. But what worried Alexander most was Emily's reaction. Every time Pierce's name was mentioned, she would recoil as if trapped in a cage. Judge Brooks, with his silver hair and piercing gaze, looked down from the high bench. "Mr. Pierce, he said, his voice deep but authoritative. You claim custody based on your blood relation. What evidence do you have to prove that you are fit to care for this child? Pierce stood, his voice smooth but lacking sincerity. Your Honor, I am the brother of the child's mother, Sophia Reynolds. I'm the only direct relative left. I have a home, a job, and I want to make up for the mistakes of the past. Emily is family, and family should be together. Alexander felt his blood boil. He wanted to leap up, shout at Pierce that he was undeserving. But Rebecca placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes warning him. Let me handle this, she whispered. Alexander nodded, but his eyes never left Pierce, as if he could see through the man's false facade. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice steady but sharp as a knife. Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Mr. Pierce is not fit to care for Emily. The child has disclosed disturbing details about Mr. Pierce's behavior in the past, including food deprivation and actions that caused physical harm. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Brooks leaned forward. Can the child testify? He asked, his gaze shifting to Emily. Emily clutched the bracelet, looking at Alexander for reassurance. He bent down, whispering, You don't have to say anything. But if you want to, I'm right here. She took a deep breath, nodded, and then slowly walked to the witness stand, her small feet moving cautiously as though she were stepping through a field of thorns. Child, Judge Brooks said, his voice softening, can you tell us about Mr. Pierce? How do you feel when you are near him? Emily swallowed hard, her voice shaky but clear. He wasn't good to my mom. He locked the fridge so my mom and I couldn't eat. One time he shoved my mom into the kitchen and a pot of boiling water spilled on me. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a crescent-shaped scar on her arm. I got burned. He said it was my fault. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Alexander's heart clenched, as if that scar was not just on Emily's skin, but carved into his own heart. He recalled the first night when she had shivered in the rain, asking to sleep in the doghouse. How could a child like her have endured such things? He clenched his fists, struggling to suppress the urge to charge at Pierce. Pierce leapt to his feet, his voice loud but trembling. That's a lie. I never hurt her. Sophia was my sister. I just wanted to help. Silence, Mr. Pierce. Judge Brooks snapped, his voice like steel. He turned to Emily, his expression softening. Thank you, Emily. You may return to your seat. Emily rushed back to Alexander's side, nearly running, and he enveloped her in his arms, feeling her small body tremble in his embrace. You did great, he whispered, his voice thick. She didn't say anything, simply clutched his hand, her tiny fingers tightening as if he were the anchor, keeping her from being swept away. Rebecca continued, calling Dr. Benjamin Hayes to the stand. Hayes stepped up, his voice steady. When I examined Emily 2 weeks ago, she was severely malnourished, with signs of old injuries, including the burn scar she just mentioned. Based on her psychological and physical state, it is clear she has endured a long period of neglect. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson was the next to testify, describing the change she had witnessed in Emily over the past 2 weeks, from a frightened, withdrawn child to one who began to smile, draw, and trust. She needs a safe place, Mrs. Thompson said, her gaze unwavering. And Mr. Harrington is providing that. Now it was Alexander's turn to testify. He stood feeling as though the entire world was watching him. I met Emily in a storm, he began, his voice deep but clear. The child asked to sleep in my doghouse because she thought it was the safest place she could find. I couldn't turn my back on that. He paused, his eyes scanning Emily. I know what it feels like to be abandoned. When I was 9 years old, my father left me at a gas station and never came back. I don't want Emily to feel that way, not for one more day. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of the court reporter's pen. Judge Brooks nodded, his expression softening. After a brief deliberation, he spoke. Based on the evidence, I am granting temporary custody to Mr. Alexander Harrington, pending further evaluation in 30 days. Mr. Pierce, I advise you to prepare clearer evidence if you wish to continue contesting. Emily threw herself into Alexander's arms as they left the courtroom, her face pressed against his chest, her tears soaking through his suit. "Thank you, Uncle," she whispered. "You didn't leave me." Alexander held her tighter, feeling as though his heart had just been unlocked. "Never," he said, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, he was no longer the tech billionaire, no longer the man who lived in a stone fortress. He was the person Emily needed, a father, even if only just beginning. But deep in his heart, he knew the battle wasn't over. Pierce wouldn't give up easily, and the world outside was still waiting to judge. He looked down at Emily, seeing the light in her eyes, and made a vow to himself. No matter what happened, he would fight for this little girl. Alexander Harrington's private jet sliced through the gray sky, leaving behind delicate trails of wispy clouds. Inside the cabin, Emily Brooks sat by the window, her wide eyes fixed on the clouds, as if they held the answers to questions she had never dared ask. The silver bracelet with its key charm sparkled on her wrist, a reminder of Alexander's promise that she was safe, that she belonged somewhere. But today's journey to Cincinnati was not just a geographic trip. It was a journey into Emily's past, a past she could only remember through fragmented shards and haunting nightmares. Alexander sat opposite her, his laptop open, but his gaze never strayed far from Emily. He noticed how she gripped the armrest as the plane gently trembled, how she bit her lip when her eyes flicked over the only photo she had with her, a crumpled old picture of her mother, Sophia Reynolds, holding her as a newborn. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Emily nodded, but the motion lacked certainty. "I don't know what Aunt Olivia will be like," she whispered. "Mom said she was nice, but I don't remember much about her." Alexander leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She wants to meet you. That's a good start, right?" He smiled, but inside he too was anxious. Olivia Reynolds, Sophia's sister, was the only family member of Emily's that Alexander had managed to track down through contacts and Rebecca Lawson's investigation team. But could Olivia give Emily the sense of family she longed for? Or would she just be another door leading to disappointment? Alexander wasn't sure, but he knew he had to try for Emily. The plane landed at Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky Airport late in the afternoon as the fading sunlight bathed the sprawling fields in golden hues. A car was waiting, and within the hour, they arrived at a modest red brick house in the suburbs. The front door opened, and Olivia Reynolds stepped out, a woman in her 30s with curly hair and warm brown eyes that were strikingly similar to Sophia's. She wore a dark green sweater and carried an old photo album. When she saw Emily, Olivia stopped in her tracks, her hand covering her mouth as tears shimmered in her eyes. "Emily?" Olivia whispered, her voice choked. "Oh my God, you look just like your mom." Emily froze, her small hand clutching Alexander's, as if afraid she might be swept away. But Olivia knelt down, arms open, and something in her eyes made Emily relax. She stepped forward slowly, then rushed into Olivia's arms, holding on tightly, as though she had found a long-lost piece of herself. Alexander stepped back, feeling a wave of emotion rise, not jealousy, but a deep sense of relief. Emily needed this, a connection to her past, and he was ready to do anything to make it happen. They entered the house, where the scent of freshly baked cookies and coffee filled the air. Noah, Olivia's 10-year-old son, appeared from the living room, looking at Emily with curiosity. "Are you my cousin?" he asked, his voice full of excitement. Emily smiled shyly, nodded, and Noah pulled her into the living room, where a Lego spaceship set awaited. "I'll let you borrow my spaceship piece if you want," he said, and for the first time that day, Emily smiled genuinely. Olivia led Alexander into the kitchen where she placed the photo album on the table. "I didn't know Sophia had passed until I read about Emily in the news," she said, her voice trembling. "We lost contact after she moved in with Emily's father. Daniel, our brother, never let me get in touch. He said Sophia didn't want to see me, but I never believed him." She opened the album, revealing old photographs, Sophia holding baby Emily. Sophia laughing in the park, Sophia with bright eyes before life became too harsh. "This is her, and this is my Emily." Alexander looked at the photos, feeling a strange connection to the woman he had never met. "Emily doesn't speak much about her mom," he said, his voice low. "But whenever she mentions her, she talks about warmth." Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sophia loved Emily more than anything. But her life, it wasn't easy. Daniel made things worse. He never accepted Emily's father, and when he passed away, Daniel blamed Sophia. He made her feel like a burden." Alexander gripped the cup of coffee Olivia had handed him. "He won't get to Emily," he said, his voice hard as steel. "I'll make sure of that." Olivia looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Emily needs someone like you, not just a caretaker, but someone who will fight for her." The afternoon passed with stories and laughter echoing from the living room as Emily and Noah played together. Olivia handed Emily the photo album, and the girl flipped through the pages, her fingers brushing over the pictures as though touching the memories. "This is Mom," she whispered, pointing to a photo of Sophia wearing a Christmas hat, holding Emily in her arms. "Mom said I was her biggest gift." Alexander, standing in the doorway, felt his heart tighten. He thought about his lonely years when no one had ever called him a gift. But looking at Emily, he realized that she wasn't just someone who needed saving. She was saving him bit by bit, reminding him that family wasn't just blood. It was moments shared. On the flight back to Beverly Hills, Emily held the album tightly, her eyes brighter than ever. "Do you think I can make a new album?" she asked, her voice full of hope. "One with you and Buddy in it, too." Alexander smiled, feeling as though his heart had just been opened a little more. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We'll start as soon as we get home." When the plane landed, Emily took his hand for the first time, leading the way. "Thank you for finding Aunt Olivia," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I feel like I still have a family." Alexander gently squeezed her hand, saying nothing. But inside, a new determination began to form. He wouldn't just give Emily a home, he would give her a family, even if it was built from fragments. But deep in his mind, he knew the challenges were far from over. Daniel Pierce was still waiting, and the media would not stop digging. He looked at Emily, sleeping on the seat, the album clutched in her arms, and silently vowed. No matter what lay ahead, he would protect this little girl, not just because she needed him, but because he needed her. The pale morning light filtered through the dining room window where Alexander Harrington sat with a now cold cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on the laptop screen. The headline on the online news hit him like a punch. "The mysterious scar of the billionaire's girl truth or PR stunt." The article, accompanied by a blurry image of Emily Brooks in the courtroom, revealed details about the burn scar on her arm, along with malicious speculations that Alexander was staging the story to boost his image. He gripped his cup tightly, feeling like the blood in his veins was boiling. How had these private details from the trial leaked? And worse, who dared turn Emily's pain into a sensational story? Emily entered the room wearing a blue t-shirt and jeans, the silver bracelet with its key charm sparkling on her wrist. She stopped when she saw the expression on Alexander's face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp, as if she had grown accustomed to sensing trouble before it arrived. Alexander closed the laptop, forcing a smile. Just work, he said. But Emily's gaze told him she didn't believe him. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her small hands clasped tightly on the table. "They're talking about me again, aren't they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They always do, saying I'm the problem." He wanted to deny it to protect her from the truth, but her eyes, sharp and resolute, made it impossible to lie. "Some people wrote foolish articles," he admitted, his voice lowering. "But I'll handle it. You don't have to worry." But Emily did worry, and that became clear later in the afternoon when Alexander took her to a nearby preschool for a trial lesson. She had been excited about meeting new friends. But as they walked into the playground, a group of parents standing near the gate whispered among themselves, their eyes scanning Emily as though she were some kind of oddity. A boy a few years older than Emily pointed and shouted, "That's the girl from the paper. My mom says she's faking it to get money from the rich man." Emily froze her hands, gripping the straps of her backpack, and before Alexander could react, she turned and ran back to the car, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Emily!" Alexander called, chasing after her. He knelt by the car door where she was curled up in the back seat. "You don't need to listen to them. They don't know anything about you." "But they do know me," Emily screamed, her voice breaking. "They know the scar they know about Mom, about Uncle Daniel. Who told them? Who turned me into this?" She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the crescent-shaped scar on her arm, as if it were proof of all the pain she had endured. Alexander's heart tightened. He wanted to hug her to erase the cruel words, but he knew words alone weren't enough. "I'll find out," he said, his voice firm as steel. "And I'll stop this." Back at the mansion, Alexander called Rebecca Lawson. "Where did the leak come from?" he asked, his voice cold. "Details from the trial. The scar Emily's story shouldn't just appear in the news." Rebecca on the phone sighed. "It's likely from Child Protective Services. A staff member perhaps bribed. I'm investigating, but the media won't stop. They smell a big story." "Then we'll create another story," Alexander said, his eyes flashing. "Arrange an interview. I want Emily to speak for herself in her own way." The interview took place the following day in the living room of the mansion with a reporter from a reputable television channel. Emily sat on the sofa beside Alexander Buddy, lying at her feet like a loyal guardian. The reporter, a woman with a friendly smile but sharp eyes, asked, "Emily, how do you feel living with Mr. Harrington?" Emily hesitated, looking at Alexander, and he nodded in encouragement. She took a deep breath, her voice soft but clear. "He doesn't just help me. He sees me. Not like saving a lost dog, but like I'm a real person. I don't want to be anyone's secret. I just want to be Emily." Her words, simple yet sincere, made the reporter pause for a moment. Alexander felt his chest warm, as if the light from Emily was spreading outward. He gently took her hand and added, "She's not a story to sell newspapers. She's a child, and I will do everything to protect her." The interview aired that evening, and the responses on social media exploded. Some praised Alexander for his compassion, while many others continued to doubt him, calling him an opportunist or attention-seeking. Alexander didn't care about them. What pained him was the message from Rebecca the next morning. "Daniel Pierce has filed an appeal. He claims Emily's interview is evidence that you're manipulating her." Standing in his office, looking out at the garden where Emily was playing with Buddy, tossing a tennis ball and laughing as the dog leapt to catch it, Alexander knew Pierce was using the media attention to strengthen his lawsuit. But he also knew one thing: Emily was no longer the shivering child in the rain. She was becoming stronger, and so was he. He called Rebecca. "Dig deeper into Pierce," he said. "Find everything, every receipt, every message, every witness. If he wants a war, I'll show him one." When he hung up, Emily ran inside holding a new drawing, a house with lit windows beside it, a buddy and a tall man whom he recognized as himself. "This is our house," she said, her voice full of hope. "Do you think it's okay?" Alexander knelt down, holding the drawing, feeling as if his heart had been unlocked once again. "It's more than okay," he said, his voice thick. "It's perfect." But in his heart, he knew the battle wasn't over. The media, Pierce, and the world were still waiting to pass judgment. He looked at Emily, her eyes shining as she hugged Buddy, and silently vowed no matter what storms lay ahead, he would keep this house, their house, always lit. The soft autumn sunlight filtered through the windows of Alexander Harrington's office, casting a warm golden glow over the wooden desk. Amid the design plans and legal documents lay a scribbled yet colorful drawing from Emily Brooks. A large house with bright walls, wide windows, and a garden full of lavender. Beside the house were the words written in shaky handwriting, "The Sanctuary." Alexander looked at the drawing, his fingers tracing the purple crayon strokes, and a small flame of hope ignited in his chest. Not anger, but hope. This idea, sparked from a casual afternoon conversation, had become a guiding light for both of them. Emily sat on the rug next to Buddy, coloring a new drawing. She looked up, her eyes bright, but still tinged with caution. "Do you think people will like it?" she asked, her voice small but full of longing. "I mean, the sanctuary. A place for kids like me." Alexander knelt beside her, picking up the drawing. "They won't just like it," he said, his voice sure. "They'll need it. And you're the one who thought of it, Emily. That's the most amazing thing." Emily smiled, a rare smile as radiant as the sunlight outside. The idea of the sanctuary had come from a day when Emily spoke about the nights she wandered searching for shelter in alleys or under awnings. "If there was a place where no one would kick us out," she had said, "a place with light and no one would be afraid, everything would be different." Those words had awakened something in Alexander. He had built billion-dollar tech apps, but he had never thought about building a place for kids like Emily, a place that wasn't just a home, but a symbol of hope. He called his best architects and contractors, turning Emily's idea into concrete plans. Over the past 2 weeks, his mansion had become the command center. Design plans covered the table, meetings were held continuously, and Emily, though only 6 years old, was always there, contributing with an astonishing seriousness. She pointed at the designs, suggesting adding a lavender garden, "because the smell makes me feel calm," and a drawing room so we can tell our stories. Alexander listened to every word, taking careful notes, and felt his heart expand with each of her ideas. Today, the construction team arrived at the mansion to present a 3D model of the sanctuary. Alexander led Emily into the meeting room, where a large screen displayed an image of a modern building with a glass facade, green roofs, and a vast garden. Emily stood still, her hand tightly clutching her silver bracelet, her eyes lighting up when she saw the lavender garden in the model. "It's really real," she whispered, as though she couldn't believe her dream was coming to life. "Really?" Alexander replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And you're the one who made it happen." The contractor, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, nodded. "We can start construction in about a month if you approve the budget." Alexander nodded immediately without needing to look at the figures. To him, the sanctuary was not just a project, it was a promise to Emily and to himself that he could do something more meaningful than just writing code. That afternoon, Alexander and Emily sat in the garden where Buddy was digging in the dirt, tail wagging happily. Emily held a pencil, adding details to her drawing, a child standing under a streetlight. But this time there was a door opening behind them. "This is me before," she said, pointing to the child. "And this is where I want everyone to find." Alexander looked at the drawing, feeling a wave of emotion rise within him. He remembered the lonely days of his own past, when he wandered after being abandoned by his father, sleeping in dark corners of the city. He had never thought he could change the world. But Emily, with her resilience and imagination, was showing him that it was possible. "You know," he said, his voice thick, "when I was your age, I thought I didn't belong anywhere. But you've changed that. You make me want to create a place for everyone." Emily looked up, her eyes sparkling. "Will you be there at the sanctuary?" "Always," Alexander replied, and for the first time he felt he wasn't just saying it to comfort her. He genuinely wanted that. That evening, Alexander held a small class for Emily in the library. He laid out a whiteboard and taught her basic business concepts, how to manage a budget, but in a simple, playful way. Emily sat in the chair, her feet swinging, taking notes with colored pencils. "If we want more lavender," she said. "How much money do we need?" Alexander laughed, writing a hypothetical figure on the board. "You'll need a big sponsor," he said, winking. "Lucky for you, I know a guy." Emily giggled, but her gaze was serious. "I want the sanctuary to be free. No one should have to pay to be safe." Those words made Alexander pause. He looked at her and realized that at just 6 years old, Emily understood something he had taken decades to comprehend. The true value isn't in money, but in what it brings to others. He nodded, his voice softening. "I agree. The sanctuary will be free. I promise." When Emily went to bed, Alexander sat in his office looking at the sanctuary's designs on the screen. He thought about his own lonely years when he built his empire to mask the pain. But now, with Emily in the sanctuary, he was building something different, a legacy not just for himself, but for children like her. He touched Emily's drawing on the table, his fingers brushing over the open door in the picture, and felt a spark of hope. But deep inside, he knew the challenges were not over. Daniel Pierce was preparing his appeal, and the media wouldn't stop digging. Alexander looked out into the darkness beyond the window where the garden lights reflected on Buddy's doghouse. He silently vowed the sanctuary would not just be a building. It would be a testament to Emily's strength and to his promise that she would never have to stand in the rain again. The soft light of early autumn filtered through the windows of the mansion, casting a gentle golden glow across the living room. Alexander Harrington stood before the mirror in his office, adjusting his tie. But his eyes weren't focused on his reflection. Instead, he thought about Emily Brooks, the little girl sitting at the dining table having breakfast with toast and strawberry jam, the silver bracelet sparkling on her wrist. Today was the first day of the 30-day evaluation required by the court after Daniel Pierce filed an appeal for custody. Victoria Langley, the Child Protection Agency worker, would be coming to observe Emily's life in his home. Alexander felt the weight of the pressure, not because he doubted his ability, but because the thought of losing Emily, even just the possibility, felt like his heart was being squeezed. Emily walked into the room, Buddy trailing lazily behind her tail, wagging lightly. She was wearing a blue sweater and jeans, her hair neatly tied with a ribbon Mrs. Eleanor Thompson had chosen. "Are you stressed?" she asked, her sharp eyes, as if she could see through the tough exterior he had built. Alexander smiled, though the smile did little to mask his anxiety. "I just want everything to be perfect," he said, kneeling to her eye level. "Ms. Langley is coming today. She just wants to see how you're doing here. Just be yourself, okay?" Emily nodded, but her hand tightened around the key charm on her bracelet. "She's going to ask about Uncle Daniel, right?" Her voice softened, carrying a fear she tried to hide. "I don't want to talk about him anymore." Alexander placed his hand on her shoulder, feeling her small body tremble. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to," he said, his voice firm. "I'm here. Ms. Langley will see how happy you are, and that's what matters most." But when Victoria Langley entered the mansion later that morning, clipboard in hand and her gaze neutral, Alexander felt the atmosphere grow heavy. Langley, a middle-aged woman with silver hair tied back low and a calm, steady voice, observed everything with the meticulousness of a scientist. She took notes as she watched Emily play with Buddy in the garden, as the girls showed her the lavender garden in the design of the sanctuary, and as she talked about the art lesson Mrs. Thompson had organized. But Langley's expression revealed nothing. No empathy, no doubt only a professional wall. The interview took place in the living room where the light from the stone fireplace created dancing shadows on the walls. Langley sat across from Emily, her voice gentle yet sharp. "Emily, how do you feel living here with Mr. Harrington?" she asked, her pen hovering over the paper. Emily looked at Alexander, then at Langley, her hand still gripping her bracelet. "I feel safe," she said, her voice small but clear. "Mr. Alexander doesn't just give me food or a place to sleep. He listens to me. He makes me feel like I'm important." Those words made Alexander's chest warm, but he held his composure, keeping a calm face. Langley nodded, taking notes, then asked, "Do you remember anything about your family before? About Uncle Daniel Pierce or anyone else?" Emily stiffened, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't want to talk about Uncle Daniel," she whispered. "He made my mom sad. He made me scared." She paused, then added, "But I have Aunt Olivia. She's nice. She gave me an album of pictures of Mom." Langley wrote more notes, her eyes not leaving Emily. "So do you want to stay here with Mr. Harrington, or would you like to live with another relative like Aunt Olivia?" The question felt like a knife through Alexander. He looked at Emily, trying not to let his worry show. She looked up at him, her gaze resolute. "I want to stay with Mr. Alexander," she said, her voice stronger than ever. "This is my home." Alexander felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was quickly dampened when Langley turned to him. "Mr. Harrington, are you aware of the long-term responsibilities of adopting a child? Your life is very busy, and the media is paying attention. Can you provide the stability Emily needs?" The question made Alexander falter. He thought about the lonely years when work was the wall that kept him from the world. But then he looked at Emily, saw her trust in him, and he knew the answer. "I built a company from the ground up," he said, his voice deep but steady. "But nothing in it matters more than Emily. She has changed me. I don't promise to be perfect, but I promise I'll spend my life making sure she's safe, loved, and heard." Langley nodded, but her gaze remained neutral. "I will need to observe further for the next 30 days, she said. "And we have a new development. Catherine Pierce, Daniel Pierce's cousin, has filed for custody as an alternative." Alexander felt his blood run cold. Catherine Pierce. Another relative appearing out of nowhere. He glanced at Emily, seeing her shrink back, her eyes filled with panic. "Who is Catherine?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know her." Langley stood up, gathering her clipboard. "I'll send more information. For now, continue as you have been. I'll be back." When Langley left, Emily ran to Alexander, pressing her face against his chest. "I don't want to go anywhere," she said, her tears soaking through his shirt. "I want to stay here with you, with Buddy, with the sanctuary." Alexander hugged her tightly, feeling like his heart, which had been clenched, was finally released. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered, his voice thick. "I promise." That night, Alexander called Rebecca Lawson. "Who is Catherine Pierce?" he asked, his voice cold. "And why is she showing up now?" Rebecca sighed on the phone. "We're investigating. She seems to be Daniel's cousin living in Ohio, no criminal record. But her timing is very suspicious. It could be Daniel behind this, trying to put pressure on us." Alexander gripped the phone tightly. Find everything about her. I want to know if she has any connection to Daniel." When he hung up, Emily entered the office holding the photo album Olivia had given her. She opened to a picture of her mother Sophia smiling brightly in the park. "Mom said family is where you can be yourself," she whispered. "You're my family, right?" Alexander knelt down, taking her hand. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "And I will fight to keep that." He looked out the window where the darkness covered the garden. Catherine Pierce, Daniel Pierce, the media, all of them were like cold winds trying to extinguish the flame Alexander and Emily were building. But when he looked into Emily's eyes, saw the resilience in them, he knew he wouldn't give up. The sanctuary would not just be a building, it would be a testament to his promise, and he would protect it, just as he would protect Emily at all costs. Courtroom number 3 at the Los Angeles Family Court was thick with tension, as though the very air was holding its breath. The light from the tall windows streamed down onto the polished wood floor, highlighting the floating dust particles, small but present, just like the details that had led Alexander Harrington and Emily Brooks to this decisive moment. Alexander sat at the plaintiff's table. His black suit fitted perfectly, but his hands were clenched under the table, his thumb gliding over his knuckles as he tried to control the storm of emotions inside him. Beside him, Emily, in a simple blue dress, sat with her back straight, her hand gripping the silver bracelet with the key charm. Her eyes scanned the room, stopping on Daniel Pierce across the aisle, his gaze cold and sharp, like a wolf waiting for the right moment. Judge Harlan Brooks, with his silver hair and piercing eyes, sat high on the bench, his voice echoing calm, yet authoritative. "Today, we will make the final decision regarding the custody of Emily Brooks," he said, flipping through a stack of papers. "I have reviewed the reports from Ms. Victoria Langley, the witnesses, and the evidence from both sides. Now we will hear the final testimony." Rebecca Lawson, Alexander's lawyer, stood up, her voice sharp yet composed. "Your Honor, we have presented clear evidence that Mr. Alexander Harrington has not only provided a safe and stable environment for Emily, but has also built a relationship based on trust and love. Ms. Langley's report confirms that Emily has shown significant improvement in her health, mental well-being, and sense of safety. On the other hand, Mr. Daniel Pierce has a concerning history, including allegations of domestic violence and neglecting Emily in the past." Pierce jumped up, his voice loud but shaking. "That's a lie. I'm her family. Blood relatives should be prioritized, Your Honor. Harrington is just a rich man playing the hero." "Basanham." Pierce's lawyer, a short man with round glasses, tried to pull him back down, but Pierce's gaze remained locked on Emily, making her shrink back in fear. Alexander felt his blood boil, but he stayed silent, his eyes fixed on Emily, silently telling her, "I'm here. You're not alone." He remembered the first night when she had shivered in the rain, asking to sleep in Buddy's doghouse. Today, that same little girl was still here, but stronger, more resilient, and he would not let anyone take that light from her. Judge Brooks turned his gaze to Emily, his voice softening. "Emily, would you like to say something to the court? This is your opportunity to speak your mind." Emily took a deep breath, her hand tightening around the key charm. She looked at Alexander, then stood up, walking to the witness stand with small yet steady steps. The courtroom fell silent, only the sound of her shoes gently tapping on the wood floor. "My name is Emily Brooks," she began, her voice small but clear like a stream cutting through stone. "I used to think I didn't have a home, that no one wanted me. I used to sleep outside in the rain because no one would open the door. But Mr. Alexander did. He didn't just give me food or a place to sleep. He made me feel like I mattered." She paused, her eyes gliding over Pierce before returning to the judge. "Uncle Daniel wasn't good to my mom. He made her cry, made me scared. He didn't want me, he just wanted to win. But Mr. Alexander, he fights for me, not for him. I want to stay with him. I want to call him Dad." Her words were like a beam of light shattering the darkness in Alexander's chest. He felt his eyes sting a rare sensation he had tried to bury since he was a child. He looked at Emily, seeing the strength in her eyes, and realized she wasn't just speaking for herself, but for both of them, for the family they had built from the fragments. Rebecca continued calling Olivia Reynolds Emily's aunt as a witness. Olivia stepped up, her curly hair tied high, her voice trembling but firm. "I lost contact with my sister Sophia because of Daniel Pierce," she said. "He isolated her, made her feel like a burden. When I found Emily, I saw her happy with Mr. Harrington. She needs someone who loves her and protects her, and Mr. Harrington is doing that." Catherine Pierce Daniels' cousin was also called to the stand. She, a middle-aged woman with a shifty gaze, spoke of her desire to give Emily a real family. But when Rebecca cross-examined her, Catherine admitted she had only met Emily once, when the girl was very young, and she had no specific plans for taking care of her. "I just think families should be together," she repeated, her voice weak. After an hour of deliberation, Judge Brooks returned his gaze soft yet firm. "Based on the evidence and testimonies, I find that the best interest of Emily Brooks is to remain with the person who has demonstrated dedication and the ability to care for her. I am officially granting permanent custody to Mr. Alexander Harrington." The courtroom erupted into whispers, but all Alexander could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding. Emily rushed into his arms, holding on tight, her tears soaking through his suit. "You did it," she whispered, her voice choked. "You didn't leave me." Alexander held her tightly, feeling like the whole world had been put back in place. "Never," he said, his voice thick, tears silently running down his cheek, the first time he had cried since that night at the gas station when he was 9. Outside the courtroom, the press was waiting. Cameras and microphones pointed at them. Alexander held Emily's hand, standing in front of the crowd, his voice loud and clear. Not that of a billionaire, but of a father. "Emily is my family," he said, his gaze unwavering. "She's not a story for you to write about. She is my home, and I will protect her at all costs." Emily looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I get to go home," she said, her voice soft but strong, making the reporters fall silent for a moment before the questions exploded. But Alexander didn't answer. He led Emily through the crowd, hand in hand, Buddy waiting by the car with his tail wagging. As they drove away from the courthouse, Alexander looked at Emily, seeing her smile, clutching her photo album of her mother. He thought about the sanctuary, about the lavender garden, and about his promise. The battle was over, but their journey, the journey of a family, was just beginning. And for the first time in his life, Alexander felt that he wasn't just surviving, but truly living. The early winter sunlight filtered gently through the backyard of the Beverly Hills mansion, casting a soft golden hue over the newly planted lavender beds. Alexander Harrington stood on the porch, holding a cup of coffee, the warmth from the cup spreading through his hands, though it didn't compare to the warmth he felt inside. Below, Emily Harrington, officially carrying his last name after the adoption process was completed, ran across the lawn with Buddy the golden retriever, her laughter ringing through the cool air like wind chimes. The silver bracelet with the key charms shimmered on her wrist, a symbol not just of this home, but of the family they had built. Alexander took a sip of his coffee, his gaze soft as he watched Emily. Just a few months ago, she had been a small, shivering figure in the rain, asking to sleep in Buddy's doghouse. Now she was the center of his world, a small flame that had lit up the dark corners of his soul. The decision to change Emily's last name from Brooks to Harrington was not just a legal formality. It was a declaration that she belonged here, that they were family not by blood, but by love and determination. Emily ran over, her cheeks flushed from running, holding a sprig of lavender. Dad, look, smell this. she said, offering the flower. The word Dad was still new, and it made Alexander pause every time he heard it, like a note that made his heart tremble. He bent down, smelling the gentle fragrance, and smiled. "It's perfect, Emily. You picked the right flower for the sanctuary." She nodded, her eyes glowing. The sanctuary, the community center that Emily had inspired, was nearly complete. The building, located in the outskirts of Los Angeles, was a structure of glass and wood, with bright walls surrounded by the lavender garden and featuring a large art room, just like Emily had dreamed. Today was the grand opening, and Alexander felt a rare excitement, not because of the pressure from the media or the donors, but because he wanted this day to be perfect for Emily. By midday, they drove to the site. The sanctuary stood tall, its glass facade reflecting the blue sky. The lavender garden filling the air with its sweet scent. Emily held Alexander's hand, her eyes shining as she looked at the crowd. Gathered donors, social workers, and children from shelters, all invited to witness this moment. She wore a new blue dress, her hair tied with a ribbon, standing straight like a little leader. As the ceremony began, Alexander stepped onto the podium, his voice resonating through the microphone, steady yet full of emotion. "The sanctuary is not my idea," he said, his eyes focused on Emily. "It's the dream of a little girl who taught me that family is not just where you're born, but where you're loved and seen. Today we open our doors for children who need a safe place, a place to dream." The crowd applauded, but it was Emily who stepped forward next. She held a large pair of scissors, slightly awkward because of the size, and cut the red ribbon across the main door. The applause erupted, and Emily smiled a radiant smile that Alexander had never seen before. "This is everyone's home," she said, her voice small but strong. "No one has to sleep outside anymore." After the ceremony, Emily led Alexander and the other children into the art room, where the walls were covered with white paper and boxes of colored pencils. She pointed to a large painting hanging in the center, a house with lit windows identical to the drawing she had once given Alexander. "This is where we begin," she said, her eyes sparkling. Alexander hugged her, feeling tears welling up, but he smiled, letting her lead the way. That afternoon, Alexander and Emily drove to a small cemetery on the outskirts. Emily held the photo album of her mother, and in her hand was a handwritten letter. The handwriting still clumsy, but full of meaning. They stopped before a simple grave, the headstone reading Sophia Reynolds, beloved mother. Emily knelt down, placing the letter on the grave, and whispered, "Mom, I have a home now. I think you'd like Dad. He's good just like you." Alexander stood back, giving Emily space, but his heart tightened. He thought about his lonely years when there had been no one to share moments like these. But now with Emily, he had not just found a family, but also a purpose. On the drive back, Emily slept on the car, her head resting on Alexander's shoulder. He looked at her, seeing the peace on her small face, and realized that the sanctuary was not just a gift for other children, it was Emily's gift to him, a way to heal both of them. He drove down tree-lined roads, the sunset casting a glow on Emily's silver bracelet. And he knew that though the world outside might continue to judge, they had built something unbreakable, a home, a family, a place of safety. The summer of the following year arrived, and the garden of the sanctuary was awash in shades of lavender, its fragrance gently filling the warm air. Alexander Harrington stood on a makeshift wooden platform in the middle of the lawn, his gaze sweeping across the gathered crowd, children from shelters, volunteers, and families who had found hope through the doors of the sanctuary. Beside him stood Emily Harrington, now a little taller, standing straight in a soft yellow dress, the silver bracelet with the key charm shimmering in the sunlight. She was no longer the small, shivering girl from the storm. At 7 years old, Emily carried a newfound confidence like a small but unquenchable flame. Today marked the anniversary of the sanctuary's opening, and Alexander felt a rare sense of peace. The Beverly Hills mansion, once his lonely fortress, was now filled with the laughter of children and Emily's paintings decorating the walls. But the sanctuary, the dream Emily had sparked, was their true legacy. The building of glass and wood with bright walls and the lavender garden surrounding it had become a refuge for dozens of children. A place where, as Emily once said, no one has to sleep on the street anymore. Alexander stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady and resonant, echoing through the garden. A year ago, I didn't know that one little girl could change my entire world. He began, his eyes focused on Emily. The sanctuary wasn't my idea. It's Emily Harrington's. A little girl who taught me that family is not just about blood, but about those who open their doors to you, even in the storm. The crowd clapped and Emily smiled, her cheeks flushed with shyness. She stepped up to the podium, holding a small candle, its light reflecting in her eyes. I used to think I didn't have a home. She said, her voice small but strong like a stream cutting through rock. But Dad gave me a home, and the sanctuary is a home for everyone who needs it. Today, I want to light this candle to thank not just Dad, but everyone here, because you made me believe that I matter. She lit the candle, placed it in a paper lantern, and released it into the sky. The crowd stood in silence, watching the small flame float upwards, a symbol of the hope Emily had brought. Alexander felt his eyes sting, but he didn't hide it. He hugged Emily, feeling her small heart beat strongly against his chest, and he knew that this moment would stay with him forever. That afternoon, as the summer party continued, Emily led a group of children into the sanctuary's art room, where she had started a new project, a podcast created by the children telling their own stories. Alexander stood at the door listening as Emily patiently guided a boy on how to use the microphone. Just say what you feel, she told him. No one will judge you here. Alexander smiled, thinking about their journey. A week ago, he had received a letter from Daniel Pierce, sent through Rebecca Lawson. The letter was shorthand written and offered no apology, but it was an acknowledgement. I will no longer interfere. Take care of the girl. Alexander had burned the letter not out of anger, but because he didn't want Pierce's past to haunt Emily's future. She deserved a fresh start, and so did he. That evening, Alexander and Emily sat on the porch of the mansion, looking out at the garden where Buddy was sleeping under the moonlight. Emily hugged the photo album of her mother, flipping to a picture of Sophia Reynolds, smiling brightly. I think Mom would be proud, she said, her voice soft but certain. She always said I would do something great. Alexander took her hand, feeling the warmth from her small fingers. Your mom was right, he said, his voice thick. You've done more than something great. You've changed me, Emily. You gave me a family. Emily looked up, her eyes sparkling. I have a family too, she said, resting her head on his shoulder. I like calling you Dad. It makes me feel safe. The word Dad still made Alexander's heart flutter like the perfect note of music. He thought about the lonely years when he had built his empire to hide the pain when he thought he didn't need anyone. But Emily had broken down that wall little by little with her resilience and trust. He looked out at the garden, remembering the first night she had appeared shivering in the rain, and realized that she hadn't just found a home, she had built one for both of them. Do you want to tell a story for the podcast? Emily suddenly asked, her voice full of excitement. About you? Calling me your daughter and how you opened the door for me? Alexander laughed, a real smile no longer hidden. I think that's the best story, he said. But you have to tell your part too, the part about the little girl who taught a stubborn guy like me how to love. Emily giggled, hugging him tightly. Deal. As night fell, the moonlight bathed the garden in shimmering silver. Alexander and Emily sat there side by side, Buddy softly snoring next to them. He thought about the sanctuary, about the children who would find hope within its bright walls, about the lavender garden Emily loved, and about the podcast that would spread her voice to the world. He thought about their journey from the storm to the light, from the doghouse to a family, and realized that this was not the end, but the beginning of a legacy. Emily yawned, her eyelids heavy. "Dad," she whispered, "I think the sanctuary will make people happy, just like it did for me." Alexander kissed her forehead, feeling his heart fill up. "You're right," he said. "And you're the one who made it all begin." They sat there under the moon in the home they had built together, not just with bricks and glass, but with love, trust, and promises that would never be broken. Alexander looked at Emily, saw the light in her eyes, and knew that no matter how the world changed, they would always have each other. And that more than any empire he had ever built was his greatest legacy.